You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. After a bit of a holiday, I came back this week and caught up on some things before preparing for some upcoming events. This gave me time to work on the book, get some backlog tasks accomplished, plus some other content learning for myself. You can't complete a week without a little yak shaving. I'll fill you in on what random task ended up on my plate again this week. Then, during my learning, I came across two really great pieces that I'm excited to tell you about. Let's get started. The first topic that I started off with this week is working on the book. I got another chapter wrapped up, which was super exciting, but then the next piece was to actually start a new one. And as I've always found throughout my school days and college years and so on, getting started is the hardest part, and still is to this day. Whether that's started on a new chapter, starting just a section for the day, or continuing a section I left off with the previous day, or starting a review of a chapter or section, getting started initially is just the toughest thing to dig in on. I'm also noticing, though, that longer blocks for this type of work do seem to go better. Rather than trying to squeeze in an hour or two here or there, blocking either a full or a half day devoted just to this single task of working on the book, whatever that might entail for the day, does seem to help improve my motivation and my productivity. If I just plan on like one or two things or very high level goals for the day or for the half day or whatever block of time I can block off, then that's great. Now, I might get interrupted for a meeting or a small task within that time frame, and that's okay with me, for at least for right now. But having that one main focus project for the day does seem to help move things along a little bit and just focus my mind in on that one thing. So getting started, a challenge, but really it's just pushing myself to get going, knowing that once I get started, things will just continue to roll and snowball and it will get much better and I'll enjoy it again. But getting over that first little hump of actually starting in on something is the most challenging. And then just blocking those longer bits of time seem to help me get going and get through more in a larger block of that calendar. I also got to work on some backlogged tasks that I haven't been able to work on in a while. The first thing is that Neo4j has an educator program, and I have been in charge of that for the last several years. Neo4j as a whole recently invested a lot into a revamp of the Neo4j startup program, which used to be owned by my team. But that is now transitioned. And so now that startup program is giving Aura, our cloud database as a service product, it's giving Aura credits and depending on your startup stage and so on. So if you're not familiar with that, feel free to go out and check it out if you're a startup and interested in that. But the educator program is somewhat similar, I suppose, but it's based around professors and those just wanting to teach about Neo4j. Now, it does need some updates as well. It was something that I've kind of gone back and done some revamps every so often. It's been around for several years now, and it's something that I really enjoy doing. I just don't always have a lot of time to get in and update things. So I spent some time this week actually devoting time to this and trying to get some content things and other things updated. I worked on refreshing some of the content, the slide decks and resources that we give professors in order to teach or help students learn. Updating some of the emails and the resource links, instructions, tutorials, documentation, etc. So just working through some of that. I'm not near finished yet, but at least I made some progress on that. And I was really happy with that this week. Now, as with everything during a week, you can't avoid some yak shaving. Now, if you're not familiar with this term, it's something that I kind of grew up hearing from someone who had parents in tech industry. But what yak shaving is it's doing something that must be done in order to get another task done. Sometimes that's a series of tasks or lots of little, maybe seemingly unimportant things that help you accomplish a larger goal, etc. And of course, I had one of those this week again. Now, recently, this is the second time actually, I've come really close to the storage on my machine. And in order to do the required laptop updates, I have to clean some things off the machine. It is frustrating, but it burns so much time just in order to do a software update, basically, because I'm trying to clean things off just so I can get the update so we can download the installer and update everything and then restart the machine. and I have to clear off space in order for it to even do that update. But this is incredibly necessary and, of course, important as well. So it's just something that has to get done. But that's what I spent some of my time doing, at least this week. And I also did the same thing a few weeks ago as well. Again, frustrating, but I am working on cleaning a bunch of things off, so maybe I won't have this problem again. I also spent some time this week doing some learning and content intake, which is really fun. It's not something that I always get a chance to really dig deep on or explore a lot. Usually just that happens in the gaps of time that I might have throughout a day or a week. And I will talk about both the things that I came across this week in the content section for today. I also have a few content pieces that I can line up in the next couple of weeks as well, which is really exciting too. I will look forward to applying some of the things that I learned this week in the work that I do in the following week, but I'll give you some insights into what I learned. The first thing is I am working through an O'Reilly book called Neo4j: The Definitive Guide. It's by Luann Mesquita and Christoph Williamson. This is a really great book so far. It's very practical, hands-on, production-ready knowledge to implement Neo4j and how you go about the modeling and the tactics. This chapter that I read this week was chapter 5, called Query Analysis and Tuning. This was a really fantastic and insightful chapter. It's something that I've always wanted to dig deeper on and really understand a little bit better. And I felt that this did a really great job in doing that and teaching me some things that I didn't know before. This chapter talks about tips and tricks of how the Cypher query planner works and the different options you can use in order to tune or adjust your queries for better performance. There are 3 different planners for Cypher. The book talked about each one of them. There's pipelined, slotted, and parallel. The book defines each one and when each is useful. It also discusses the explain and profile keywords in Cypher and how each of the steps work. So basically at a high level, your explain and your profile keywords you can add to the front of your query. And it will either run through the logical plan of the query and show you the logical plan of what's going to go on under the hood, what Cypher will try to do, probably. It's an estimate, realize. So it's not actually going to run the query and return what it did. That's what the profile keyword is for. So you put profile in front of your query and it will actually run the query, make any updates and reads and whatever else you might have in your query, and then bring back just the planner rendition of what it actually did rather than results of the query itself. These I find super helpful. I've always known about them and I've used them here and there, but I really loved how the authors talked in depth about each one of the pieces in those planning steps and what each did and how to optimize for one thing or another. There are lots of examples that the book goes through, compares different query plans, database hits, memory, and optimization techniques. This is the type of content that I find super helpful to better understand what is going on under the hood and something that I always feel like I'm looking for. I started down a bit of this path with my Cypher Sleuthing blog series. I don't know if any of you might remember that if you followed my blog a few years ago, where I talked about the eager step within Cypher, how to avoid eagers. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, working with dates in Cypher and some other things. But I ended up getting pulled into other things, of course, and busy with other content topics and never really got a chance to go back to that. Cypher is always something that I want to improve and optimize over time as I learn more and more about what it's actually doing. I do feel like query languages are a bit hard to level up in because you need really good data sets, the perfect data model, and the right queries in order to practice and dive deep into specific aspects of the queries and the optimization pieces. It is a fascinating topic, though, and one that I hope to continue to progress in and improve my skills even further. But I really liked how this chapter in the O'Reilly Neo4j Definitive Guide walked through this process and just helped me better understand what's going on so that when I do come across these exercises in the future, I know what to look for. The other piece of content I read this week was an article called "Does Language Still Matter in the Age of AI? Yes, but the trade-off has changed." This is an article by David Perry. I think someone sent this to me earlier this week, and I really enjoyed this article. It talks about how languages that often get complaints actually have some strengths when it comes to AI generation and workflows. The exact things that were detriments in the pre-AI practices are assets in the AI era for these specific languages. The article compared Python, Java, and Rust specifically on some performance benchmarks. I thought it was really interesting that these languages are also better consistently generated. So they do better when AI generates them. Again, probably because they're a little bit more structured, rigid types, things like that, and a bit more verbose, as the article talks about. But that also means that these languages are easier to review and understand. So even if AI will generate some code, you typically have a PR that gets submitted and a human will walk through and review those or approve those, right? Well, these much more verbose languages are better and easier to understand in review stages than maybe some of the more general or abstract languages. Now, this article does anchor from a Java perspective, but I was glad that it included other languages, such as Rust, C#, and C++. I thought it was cool that it wasn't just from a Java perspective. There's other languages that kind of get tossed into this boat as well. The bottom line here for this article is that language does still matter. And of course, every language is going to have their strengths and their weaknesses, but I really loved this take, and that right now, at least, some language expertise can be extremely valuable. This week took some meandering turns, but I still made progress. First, I finished a draft of another chapter in the book. Getting started is challenging, but always rewarding. I also worked on some updates to the Neo4j Educator program and did some content learning of my own. We closed out with 2 really great topics covering a chapter on Cypher query tuning and an article on language expertise in the age of AI. Thanks for listening, and happy coding.